Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla stock, let's go over the market and figure out what happened today and what we can expect moving into, well, a pretty massive week next week with the shareholder vote on Thursday. So with that being said, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button as it does help a lot. This is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. And of course, my membership section is live. The link is down below if you're interested. For just $2.99 a month, you get access to all my intraday thoughts, post updates, technical analysis, options flow, etc. on Tesla every single day the market is open. So definitely check that out. We've been calling some moves recently. But all in all, we're still obviously going sideways. But with that being said, jumping into a Tesla closing the day down ever so slightly, 0.3% compared to the market, roughly in line with the market, closing at 177.37 cents. Yeah, let's talk about it. So what can we expect moving forward? So before we do that, I actually want to jump into options really quickly. Something pretty interesting came in today. So this is option sells. Again, I want to make that very clear. Option sells. Right, these are the option buys, but again, these are the option sells. So if you don't know what that is, I definitely recommend, kind of do a little bit of research on what that means. But pretty much what happened was this. So we had a 2.1 million put sell, right? For July 19th, 170 strikes. In other words, they believe that Tesla will not be below 170 by July 19th. And if it is, they're very happy to buy like about 2,000 or so shares around that general area or more. A lot of shares, thousands of shares, we'll say that. But what maybe is more interesting than that to me is the fact that about 30 minutes-ish before close, we had a sequence of option put sells come in as well. Two of them below the bid, so showing some urgency, but nonetheless, pretty interesting stuff. And why? Because, well, first of all, it's for June 14th, next week, of course, right? Next Friday. Let me just double check that to make sure that's correct. Next Friday, yep, right? 195 strike. That's the interesting thing. 195 strike. So clearly they believe that Tesla is maybe going to rocket to 195 next week, right? Or they're just happy to buy shares at 195 and soak in that premium regardless. Maybe they think it'll be somewhere in the 190s because they got 18.45 per contract. That's a pretty substantial amount. So it's a pretty interesting play actually, but it's a lot of premium, like a lot of, potential shares maybe being bought here, or if of course that executes in the money and whatnot. So pretty much 1 million, almost $3 million worth of premium on this. So that's pretty interesting. So someone whale is clearly very, very bullish going to Tesla next week and by Friday's close, selling these kind of cash secured puts on Tesla for next week. So that's kind of interesting to know. In terms of options flow here, in terms of bought options, nothing too crazy. We had, I guess, two interesting ones here, 1.5 million, 1.3 million call and put, 180 call, 155 put, but they're all for literally 2025 January. So they're all leaps. I don't really look at leaps too much because what we want to know as well, what's going to happen next week, the week after, maybe even in a month, right? So that's that. But let's jump to the technical analysis over here. Now, something I want to know, right? So a member brought this up because a member pretty much told me in my member section today that this green trend line I have is quote unquote wrong because at the moment, the way they have it laid out, it shows that it's perfectly rejecting. Like even these candles right now, if I zoom in here, you can see it's kind of like having, these kind of false breakouts, and it's not like, perfectly aligned with the top of the wicks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? They're saying how they have it perfectly aligned. Now, I want to make a distinction here, and this is why I also, remember how I always say I like to use trend lines, but I'm trying to be like a little bit less reliant on them because they're subjective. But there's also another factor that kind of really influences the way trend lines can work. So right now, my chart is in, I believe, linear charts, right? It's a linear chart. A lot of people, when it's a bigger time frame, especially on the daily, especially on the weekly, they like to use logarithmic charts. Now, look what happens if I switch the chart to logarithmic from linear. So I press Alt-L, boom. Now it's logarithmic, right? So essentially, it's better weighted across a larger time frame, right? But now look at this trend line. If I actually fix this trend line now that it's in logarithmic, if I put it like this, you can see it's still towards, starting from the top over there. If I zoom in over here, you can take a look, right? It's looking a lot more of a perfect trend line, right? It's really like rejecting us almost to perfection now on all of these wicks, including today's and yesterday's wicks. It's pretty much right at the top. And it never had an actual breakout. So again, this is why I always say how, you want to be a little bit careful when it comes to these kind of things, right? You want to be a little bit careful because, again, these trend lines, there's a lot of different ways you can, place them, logarithmic, not logarithmic, linear, whatever. Just take that into account. But if you look at it in the logarithmic chart, we never actually broke out. We're still technically getting rejected by this trend line. So we definitely want to still see a breakout, which on the logarithmic chart will pretty much sometime, early next week, we'll still be somewhere above at least 179 to 181. Around that level, at least you want to start closing daily candles. Now, with that being said, I'm going to go back to my linear chart here quickly. With that being said, though, You can also look at the bottom over here, stochastic. Stochastic is starting to show that bullish crossover, which is a good sign. It seems like the bullish momentum is starting to come back into Tesla, which is good. We're still holding this overall volume profile on a slightly more bullish note, if I had to really say so, right? Obviously, we had low volume today, but another thing that can be signaling some potential bullishness moving forward is the fact that, we have this market bias band over here, right? And this is essentially a band that just really determines, well, what kind of trend are we in? Are we in a bullish trend or are we in a bearish trend? And it's pretty simple, really. Red is bearish, green equals bullish. It's really that simple. And right now you can see, this market bias is showing us in a bull trend, right? Even during this whole consolidation, you can see we had a massive breakout, turned from a bearish to a bullish trend. And now we came back to essentially retest this band, and we're pretty much trading right in that band, but it's still green and it's still showing some bullishness over there as well, right? Which is essentially right in the middle of my other indicator that I really like, which of course is the band's regression, right? You can see it's kind of in that middle. It's almost like a 20-day moving average, honestly, like averaged out almost in a way. But yeah, so keep that in mind. We are technically still in this bullish trend, and there's technically a higher chance relative to these indicators that we move up higher than we move lower. But again, the way I look at it, and the way I always like to kind of have these caveats as well, I like to have these horizontal resistances, right? Horizontal resistances to me are very, very important. Just a typical, really simple support resistance, right? And what do I look for in that scenario? Well, like I said before, about 180-ish, at least you want to start closing daily candles, because you can see we've had a lot of issues around this 180 level pretty much for quite some time now, right? Or maybe 2 weeks or so almost, right? So a lot of wicks here, a lot of rejection around this kind of 180-ish level. We want to start closing daily candles there. And we move up even higher, ideally above 185 to make it extra safe. Below that, of course, if we start closing below 173, well, we have, of course, our way down to about 170 to 168. Below that, like I said before many times, 160 to 163. Those are the main levels I'm looking for. And I do believe that once we decide to pick a direction, a pretty massive move should, in theory, happen. Because if I go back over to TrendSpider, you can see TrendSpider is still showing a squeeze happening over here. You can see these red dots in a row, showing that there's a lot of momentum being built up. So there's a lot of things to watch out for here, right? There's, and it still requires patience. Now, I did slightly follow this trade here on these whales. Now, I didn't follow it this aggressively. I mean, nowhere near this aggressively, actually. I went on what I consider to be an aggressive trade, nowhere near this aggressive, but I did go on a pretty aggressive cash secured put, because I want to make it clear, I want to make kind of, somewhat transparent, I guess. I am underweight Tesla right now in terms of my average holding that I would normally hold on Tesla, mainly because I'm waiting for this directional move. So that's why I'm going in for a little bit more aggressive cash secured puts here, right? Because again, all that's going to do is essentially, if I'm forced to buy as well, bring me back to pretty much my standard, holdings, or if you will, of Tesla stock. So keep that in mind. That's the way I'm looking at it right now. But, the MACD is still all technically obviously bearish on the daily chart. So there's a lot of conflicting signs, right? The weekly candle, you can see here, if we go over to the weekly candle, showing a massive doji. Just really all 3 weeks of these are just showing indecision, massive wicks below and above, right? It's just constant indecision. But with that being said, the MACD is still bullish, and I do like to see that personally on a weekly time frame. That's a nice thing to see. But stochastic is, of course, running out of momentum a little bit here as well. So again, like I said, in my opinion, I think ultimately Tesla will go higher. It's just a question of, do we go lower first, then go higher, or do we go higher right away? That to me is that $1 million question, if that makes sense, right? And if we do go lower, that to me, all that's going to do, it come back to, let's say 170, maybe even 160, right? All that's going to do, in my opinion, is pretty much get this MACD probably relatively close back down to the red line, which is kind of like a retest on the MACD almost of that breakout, right? That we had this crossover, and that's all that's going to be, right? And then the stochastic will have a chance to kind of maybe hopefully reset, and then I think from there we head up even higher, and it might honestly be up until August is when we actually see Tesla back in the 220s. That is a possibility as well. But we'll see. There's a lot of, momentum being built up, and I think it's going to get unleashed sometime next week. So hopefully next week we can finally pick that direction. But with all that being said and done, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like button, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.